DayBreak, Chapter 9, Rectify. The blades thudded deep into the wood onto the sides of the carriage. One slid past the claws of the crane and into the roof. Twilight pressed herself against the wall, out of sight.
Oh my gosh, no. Stay away from the windows.
Velvet hissed. She pressed her husband back.
She's gonna be looking for movement.
She gripped her pipe tight between her teeth.
You know this Joker, Twilight? Us.
Twilight swallowed hard. She was finally able to squeak out.
She's the assassin.
Twilight Velvet turned her head in shock. She pulled it back just before a blade entered the car. It zipped through the window onto the other side and hit the building right across the street.
Plan?
The crane rotated a few degrees before halting abruptly. The carriage shook. For one brief second, they could instantly see Snipe Hunt's body crushed between the crane and the carriage. The crane spun again, this time carrying them over to the sandy floor of the construction site.
Teleport.
Twilight said.
But only you two. I have to stop her.
Nightlight shook his head.
You are not going to face her alone, younglet. Get Dad out of here.
Twilight punched her hooves into the floor of the carriage. In an instant, she had ripped a gaping, pony-sized hole out of the floorboards. She removed her cape and gripped it in a bubble of magic. Her horn then flashed pure white. The cloth vanished and reappeared in midair a few meters away, where it was pelted by knives.
Go!
She dived through the hole while the scarred mare was distracted. She flapped her wings to gain altitude, but the wind was against her. It swirled around the construction site like a vacuum, pulling her back. She dared to look over her shoulder and saw the assassin flying straight at her. Twilight cupped her wings and allowed the wind to pull her towards the mare. She lashed out with all four hooves, but her target juked out of the way. The scarred mare twirled and threw a wing blade Twilight's way. Twilight vanished in a cloud of embers and reappeared on the ground. She fired a beam of pure kinetic force and clipped the assassin's wing. The mare fell into a tailspin, but landed on all four hooves. She charged headfirst at Twilight, her cold gray eyes narrowed in concentration. Twilight counted down to 0. On the mark, she teleported herself behind the mare. The scarred mare dug her hooves into the sand, and she used her own momentum to spin around, snapping a wing out as she did so. When Twilight reappeared, it was with several deadly blades flying at her. She flinched back and constructed a hasty shield. Each of the blades sliced through the barrier, following by her rear left leg and right wing. She shrieked and stumbled back. The mare charged again, landing a headbutt square in the middle of Twilight's chest. She carried Twilight for a ways, battering her with her wings. She threw Twilight to the ground and stomped onto her stomach. Twilight gritted her teeth and bucked the mare under the chin. The scarred mare landed 3 meters away, and she stood slowly, nursing her jaw with a chipped hoof. She cracked her neck and marched forward.
Is that all you got?
Twilight said. Her body shook from the adrenaline coursing throughout her veins.
I fought changeling drones that hit harder.
The mare scratched the scar on her cheek, and she sneered.
As have I.
Twilight let loose another kinetic blast. The mare danced nimbly to the side, and she fired again and again, with the same result each time. She charged, her horn lowered with a paralyzing spell on the tip. The scarred mare took flight, her wings churning up the sand onto the ground. Twilight turned her head away as her eyes stung. The mare landed shoulder first onto Twilight's back, sending her to the ground. She lay into Twilight with blow after blow, striking as many sensitive points as she could. When Twilight lashed out with a wing, she backflipped away, and Twilight sat up and glared at the mare. The assassin opened both wings, held them out, and then swung them at Twilight. Twilight Sparkle's eyes widened. She counted quickly. 13 blades, level plane of approach, and consistent speed. Her horn strobed purple as she sent a concussive blast at each blade, one after the other. They either deflected or crumbled in the face of her magic. The mare with the scarred cheek gaped, and she took a step back.
How did thou do that? I did the math.
Twilight said, drawing magic to her horn.
Plug and chug, baby.
The next spell sent the scarred mare flipping end over end into the crane. She slumped to the ground and groaned. Twilight teleported over to her. She pressed the hoof into the mare's back.
So, you want to tell me why you're gonna spend the next few thousand years rotting in a dungeon, murderer?
The mare looped her foreleg around Twilight's. She threw the princess off balance and brought her forehead to the side of her head. Twilight yelped as the assassin threw her to the ground and restrained her limbs.
Retrification. How long are we gonna wait around here for, Princess?
Care said. She walked around the edge of the garden's seating area.
It's been a good 20 minutes. Well, maybe we ought to go looking for her.
Daring said. She rested her back against the stone bench.
I don't know, maybe she's waiting until we move away from the dragon over there?
Luna glanced at the doorway. Her wings were wrapped tight around her body, bags hung under her eyes.
Skyhook hasn't returned yet. No, and I don't think that he's gonna.
Deering hung her forelegs over the back of the bench.
And if he does, he's gonna have an angry griffin trailing him. So what's the story, Princess? What was that freaky storm about? I do not know. I do not know!
Luna slammed her hooves into the stone pathway, and cracked a little more.
It could have been natural. The garden is enclosed by buildings, and winter is well on its way. Or it could have been Hurricane sending us a message, or it could have been Shardscale shrugging her shoulders. Don't blame this on me.
Shardscale said from the rooftop, and she scribbled some more. Care grunted, and rolled her eyes.
Are you recording this, or the party inside? Both. I know shorthand.
Even more scribbling.
And guys, Andean ain't happy.
Luna cursed under her breath. She paced back and forth, seething.
Twilight Sparkle should be here by now. Where is she? What's taking her?
Deering shrugged. She sat up with a start.
Hey, you don't think that she and Velvet got into trouble, do you? I don't want to believe so.
Luna frowned.
The only ponies who knew that she was coming by carriage were us and Captain Snipehunt.
Care raised an eyebrow.
Well, it wasn't exactly a national secret, Your Majesty. No, but the information wasn't openly available either.
Luna cringed as the door to the ballroom opened.
Regardless, that isn't our immediate problem.
Luna! Andean snapped. I want an explanation. What kind of sorcery has my daughter witnessed? An apologetic Skyhook bit his lip as he followed the Griffin King. And what are you doing out here by yourself? Andean waved a talon as he lumbered to them. Is not the assassin still running around? You're putting yourself in danger.
Yes, I am.
Luna strode towards him.
For your benefit, I might add.
My benefit? Andean clutched a claw to his chest. He widened his eyes and pushed up his eye patch. My benefit, eh? Pray tell, how does this benefit me above all other creatures?
You as well as all creatures,
Luna said. She stopped a half-meter from him, her snout raised.
The sooner we capture the assassin, the sooner things may return to normal.
Andean Ursagriff huffed. His head swung to the side to look Luna in the eye. You're using yourself as bait. Are you insane?
And have you a better idea, King Andean?
His eyes burned. Indeed I do! Anything would be better than putting the last pony who can raise the sun in the grave! The garden went silent. Care looked past the two rulers to see Stella, Corona, and Applejack peering through the still-open doors. King Andean Ursagriff's bristling feathers smoothed themselves out as his voice softened to a whisper. Look, there is no love lost between me and Celestia's governing style, but even I must admit, you are necessary. Luna folded her wings neatly across her back. She raised a hoof and set her mouth in a thin line.
She only wants what's best for the world.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Ain't that right? Andean ground the sharp curved edge of his beak. Except I'm afraid you'll find these ganders to be horses of a different color.
You may raise your grievances at court.
Luna turned back to the tree.
Right now, I have a killer to catch.
You're putting us all in danger, Luna! Andean roared. Protect yourself! She sat down, her back to the Griffin. He too turned and re-entered the ballroom.
Why are you and Princess Luna fighting, Father?
Stella asked, her eyes teary. Because I remember, he replied. And she does not. Applejack scrunched her muzzle before following the three Griffins into the hall. The scarred mare hit Twilight in the eye. She grabbed her head and held it against the cold metal of the crane's base. She pushed with all of her might, her muscles straining and her legs shaking. Twilight screamed at the pressure building in her skull. She fired a spell, one calling on her Pegasus abilities that sent lightning streaking from her horn. The electricity danced along the surface of the crane until it met the assassin's hoof. The mare was flung from Twilight, power burning through her limbs. Twilight held her head. She fought against her blurred vision to get a bead on the mare, and her vision cleared, but all she saw was the wing snapping towards her. The tip caught her in the throat, and she slumped back, choking for breath. The scar stood out on the mare's cheek. The deadening skin around it grew red and swollen, and she bit down on her lip and raised a hoof to crush Twilight's head. Twilight Velvet appeared in a shower of blue sparks. She sent a strong uppercut into the bottom of the mare's jaw. She followed up with two left hooks to the side of her head. She finished the combo with a headbutt that smacked the mare between the eyes with her horn. The assassin opened her mouth. Her tongue lolled out, ragged and red from having been between her teeth when the blow hit. She spat blood and leapt at Velvet. Velvet raised her hooves and blocked the downward strike. She moved to intercept another from the side and a third from the front. She sprung with a hind leg and caught the assassin in the flank. She twirled, bringing the other leg to the same place, and the scarred mare tipped to the side and rolled. They circled each other, Velvet moving quickly to put herself between the assassin and Twilight. The mare shook her white mane from her eyes and jumped high into the air. Twilight Velvet took one measured pace back and allowed the mare to dive her hooves into the sand. She brought her hooves up and around to collide against the mare's ears. The scarred mare bellowed and lunged to sink her teeth into Velvet's shoulder. The assassin wrapped her forelegs around Velvet's torso and prevented her from pulling away. Velvet grappled with the mare, trying to pry her free. They both stood on their hind legs, Velvet with her horn glowing, the mare biting down as hard as she could. The light from the horn caught the scarred mare's eye. She released Velvet's body and boxed her ears. The spell faded away unmade, and the mare hit Twilight Velvet twice in the nose with firm headbutts. She let the police chief slump to the ground, and the scarred mare wiped her mouth. She scowled with bloody teeth as she turned back to Twilight Sparkle. Twilight Sparkle, Princess of Equestria, was standing up. Her horn was lit with a ready spell, and her face was contorted with rage. Before the mare could react, Twilight had encased her in a strong, unyielding telekinetic bubble. She lifted the mare and brought her down to earth as hard as she could. She did so again, and once more for good measure. She drew a circle in the sand with the mare's body and stood in the center. She drew the mare close and dropped her. A wing spread, catching Twilight on the edge of her snout, and the scarred mare stood up and hit her with a 1-2-3 punch that left her lip bleeding. Twilight held her hooves in front of her face to block the next few punches. With her eyes ablaze, Twilight growled.
This is for Celestia!
Twilight sent a flying right hoof into the mare's jaw. The mare's head jerked to the side as she reeled from the blow.
And this is for my mom!
Twilight screamed. She turned around and bucked the mare with all of her might. The mare flew across the construction site into the wall of the unfinished building. The plaster wall crumbled on impact, covering her completely. The breath left Twilight in a whoosh of air. She scurried over to her mother and lifted her head.
Mom! Mom! Mom, can you hear me?
Twilight Velvet grinned as she opened her eyes.
It's just that broken... Oh, sweetheart. I had worse before.
Her horn lit with a quick, mild healing spell.
That'll help. At least I don't sound like a total moron.
She squinted across the lot.
Speaking of which...
Twilight left her mother to recuperate and trotted towards the broken wall. She was about halfway when the plaster shifted. The scarred mare staggered to her hooves, holding her head. One wing flapped uselessly at her side.
Wow, you're a tough cookie.
Twilight pulled her lips back.
I'm surprised they can still breathe, let alone stand.
The mare opened her eyes with a fiery glare. She gripped the limp wing with both forehooves and forced it back into its socket. She flapped her wings and raced across the sand. Twilight took a step back. The mare wasn't aiming for her, though. She looped around Twilight, making lap after lap. She sped up with each pass, kicking up dust and sand. The wind whipped Twilight's mane and stung her eyes, and Twilight held a hoof in front of her face. One of the blades from the mare's arsenal sliced her foreleg. Twilight screamed and held it to her chest. She opened her eyes and gasped, and all around her, caught up in the newborn whirlwind, were tiny, glinting shards of metal, all of which sharpened to the breath of a molecule and looping around to cut her. In the time it took to spark her horn, a blade dragged across her shoulder and broke her concentration. She looked up. The tornado of sand and metal rose to the height of the 4-story building beside her. She was at the bottom of a death trap, more blades closing in. She cast a quick shield spell that didn't even slow them down before they cut the tip off of her ear. She fought against the sand stinging her eyes, and the cuts stinging her body to come up with a plan. She couldn't grab the mare at the speeds that she was going, and she couldn't blast the blades out of the sky or stop them with a shield, and she couldn't fly out of the tornado without being diced. A blade raked a deep gash in her side. She pushed the pain down and focused on her horn. She charged it to a brilliant bright white, the markings of a teleport. If she could just get out of the whirlwind, she could fight back. She turned her body to avoid the next round of knives. One stabbed itself deep in her hind leg, knocking her off of her hooves. She kept her horn bright. Tears poured down her cheeks and were swallowed by the sand. She glared at the pseudo-motion of the mare's white mane as she spun around and around, ordering her tornado of death. Twilight shouted at her as she prepared to cast her spell. A blade across the throat silenced Twilight Sparkle, and she choked. She collapsed and her horn went out. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, and the air didn't come. At the edge of the whirlwind, a collection of yet-to-be-affixed iron framework was scooped up by the tornado. They swirled around on their way to the top. The scarred mare left the storm to its own devices and hovered beside them. She snarled at the princess at the bottom of the magic abyss and dove, the iron bars following her down. Twilight's eyes and the mare's locked, an iron coursed through the storm to end Twilight's life. But Twilight Velvet teleported on top of her daughter, and she scooped the princess up and teleported away. Metal met earth with a resounding clang that echoed throughout the entire city. The mare stopped her descent with her wings spread wide. She allowed the tornado to die down and fade away, falling to the ground. She crawled away, despite the pain that was tearing through her body, and she headed for the only safe place that she knew in the city-state. That mare is too overpowered. I bet that her weapons and armor are all maxed out in stats. Wait. Actually, she's probably just modding and making herself OP. What a cheater. All jokes aside though, that was pretty intense. Anywho, let's get on to our nimble donators. Top donators dash of Evergreen, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, Darkside, and Ponyman. Courier Crew CI, Strix, Zar630, Narwhals, Delta Omega, RuneScythe9852, Dospo, Rhiny Dragonwolf, Hunter Norman, Austin Roland, Secret Moon, Tal Rasha, The Toilet Snake, Sword Brethren Mordred, Ronin Wandering, Endrai63, Random Person Man Guy, Easy, Jack Hadge, Sky Uchiha, Starlight Glimmer, Squiddy Boy, David D. Sanchez, Soul Dragon, Gaggy, Trey, Shadow Drake, Joe Piercy, Alex F, Rainbow Dash, Tealca Anderson, TV Killer, John Becker, Leon Reynolds, Zach Rakau, Mr. ECU, Leslie Prickett, Edgar Garcia, One Kingdom 1, Nissa Rusan, Vazeri, Dyslexic Character Sheets, and Just a Random Boy. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.